cop tries to arrest black woman, but when she calls the White House, he knows it's over. A single phone call can change everything. In the heart of a bustling city, a black woman named Destiny Carter finds herself face to face with a police officer who underestimates her power and connections. The tension escalates in a heartbeat. Accusations are made, handcuffs are readied, and the officer believes he's got the upper hand. But when Destiny calmly dials a number that most Americans only dream about calling, the officer's confidence starts to crumble. There's a heavy silence on the sidewalk, the kind that happens right before the world turns upside down. Welcome to a story of power, prejudice, and shocking redemption. On a bright Thursday afternoon in late spring, the citizens of Levington, a mid-sized fictional city nestled in the American Midwest, went about their daily routines. The sweet fragrance of blooming flowers hung in the air, mingling with the smell of hot dogs from a nearby vendor on Maple Avenue. Office workers rushed on their lunch breaks, kids laughed while chasing each other outside a corner candy store, and the world seemed perfectly ordinary, at least until Officer James "Jim" Saunders arrived. Officer Saunders was a tall man with sandy blonde hair and a bearing that suggested both confidence and the burden of a troubled past. He had joined the Levington Police Department with high hopes. His father had served in the force for 3 decades. Yet James had never quite lived up to the shining legacy his father had left behind. He had a knack for making rash decisions, often guided by prejudice and a quick temper. Many in his precinct admired his determination, but others had worried about his methods for a long time. A single phone call from dispatch told him there was a suspicious individual near the intersection of Maple and 5th. No crime in progress, no immediate threat, just suspicion. The kind of vague suspicion that had a tendency to land on specific communities more often than others. Sighing, James flipped on his lights and headed toward Maple Avenue. Meanwhile, Destiny Carter was strolling down the sidewalk, searching for a birthday present for her niece. A successful grants coordinator for a community non-profit, Destiny was the type of person who exuded calm in the face of chaos. She was used to being the problem solver in her family and her neighborhood, navigating local bureaucracy for non-profits that needed funding, forging important connections, and maintaining relationships that most people only dreamed of. After all, she had once worked as an intern in a major government office in Washington, D.C., but today she looked just like another young woman out shopping in a simple floral dress and sandals with an easy smile on her face. When she noticed the police cruiser pull up to the curb, she stopped, thinking the officer might just be grabbing lunch or responding to a call that had nothing to do with her. But the moment she met Officer Saunders's eyes, she felt a chill. His gaze shifted from her shoes to her shoulders, as though he were measuring her worth or her threat level. He approached, his posture rigid, one hand resting on his utility belt near his holster. People along the sidewalk started to slow, curious about what might happen. In Levington, many folks had grown cautious of certain cops, especially in some neighborhoods, though Maple Avenue was typically a bustling multicultural hub. "Ma'am, can I see some identification?" he asked, his voice carrying an unnatural edge. Destiny blinked, surprised at the blunt request. "Excuse me," she said gently. "Is there something wrong?" "I got a call about suspicious activity in this area," Officer Saunders replied, his posture shifting even more defensively. "I'd like to see some identification." Destiny felt her stomach tighten. She'd seen this scenario play out 100 times on the news. She had hoped it would never happen to her. She wondered if she should comply immediately or question him further. Her heart raced, but outwardly she maintained her composure. "Officer," she said softly, "I'm just out shopping. Could you be more specific about what this suspicious activity is?" His glare hardened. "Are you refusing to comply?" "I'm just asking for clarity," she replied, doing her best to keep her voice respectful and calm. In the background, curious bystanders gathered. Some took out cell phones to record the interaction. Officer Saunders noticed the cameras and felt his anger rise. He hated the social media circus that sprang up whenever an officer tried to do his job. "Ma'am," he said sternly, "if you won't provide identification, I'll have to bring you in for questioning." Destiny gazed into his eyes and saw something that made her stomach clench. A stubborn determination coupled with something far darker. She'd heard about Officer Saunders from local activists. This was a man who often went too far. With a steadying breath, she held up her hands in a gesture of compliance and said, "I'll give you my name. But please let me call someone who can clarify this situation immediately." Saunders sneered. "You want to call a lawyer?" Destiny shook her head. "Not exactly," Saunders smirked. "Who then?" She pulled out her phone. "The White House." A ripple of disbelief passed through the bystanders. Some of them whispered that Destiny was crazy. Others looked hopeful, suspecting that maybe she did have connections. All Officer Saunders could do was scoff. This was Maple Avenue, not Pennsylvania Avenue. What could she possibly mean by the White House? He had no idea that this was the moment his entire life would begin to unravel. Officer Saunders watched, bemused, as Destiny tapped at her phone with confident precision. "So you worked at the White House, huh?" he said sarcastically. "I'm sure they take your calls right away." Destiny ignored him. Her heart was pounding, but she was determined to keep her voice steady when the line connected. She didn't know if her contact could help directly, but she had a pretty good idea that once the call was traced back to the 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue NW switchboard, everything would change. She tapped a number she had stored long ago, a direct line to a former mentor who still worked as a senior advisor. The call rang once, then again. The watchers on the street stared, baffled. A few folks started recording more actively, capturing Destiny's calm figure, phone pressed to her ear, and the officer's tense posture. Something crackled on the other end of the call. A crisp, professional voice answered, "This is the White House switchboard. How may I direct your call?" Officer Saunders's smirk began to fade the moment he heard the greeting echo from Destiny's phone. She didn't bother lowering her voice or stepping aside. She wanted him and everyone around to hear every word. "Yes," Destiny replied, clearing her throat. "This is Destiny Carter. I'd like to speak to Senior Advisor Alyssa Wade if she's available, please. It's urgent." There was a pause. The operator, accustomed to countless calls daily, some real, some frivolous, checked her system. "Miss Carter, hold one moment while I see if Miss C. Wade is available." Destiny cast a sidelong glance at Officer Saunders, who struggled to maintain his composure. A muscle twitched in his jaw. The bystanders were now wide-eyed, their faces a mixture of shock and something akin to excitement, as if they sensed that they were witnessing an unbelievable turning point. Within seconds, a woman's voice, polished and warm but also urgent, came through. "Destiny, is that you? It's Alyssa. Is everything okay?" Destiny had to steel herself against a wave of relief. She couldn't believe this was happening right on the sidewalk. "Alyssa, I'm so sorry to call you like this. I'm being detained by a police officer who claims I look suspicious. I'm literally out shopping, minding my own business. I'm not accusing him of anything just yet, but I'm concerned about his approach." Officer Saunders took an involuntary step closer, his face reddening as he heard Alyssa's voice. He was torn between snatching the phone away and hearing how this would play out. Ultimately, he did nothing, too stunned to act. Alyssa's voice rang out clearly. "Detained? That's Destiny. Are you safe?" Destiny nodded as if Alyssa could see her. "I'm surrounded by people with cell phones recording the entire thing. He hasn't used physical force yet, but, well, I'm afraid that might change." "Put him on the phone," Alyssa demanded, her tone brooking no argument. Officer Saunders's eyes widened. Destiny extended the phone toward him. She met his gaze, her eyes steady and imploring him to take it. The crowd watched with bated breath. The officer hesitated, then, under the silent scrutiny of a dozen phone cameras, he raised the phone to his ear. "Hello, this is Officer Saunders," he said, trying to sound firm, but there was a quake in his voice. Alyssa spoke in a measured, authoritative tone. "Officer Saunders, my name is Alyssa Wade, Senior Advisor to the White House. Destiny Carter is a friend and a former intern who worked directly under my supervision. I'm sure there's been some misunderstanding, but if you harm her or violate her rights in any way, you will find yourself subject to serious legal repercussions. We take allegations of misconduct very seriously, especially when it involves profiling and harassment. Do you understand?" Officer Saunders swallowed hard, sweat beading on his forehead. "Yes, ma'am," he croaked. He took a shaky breath and handed the phone back to Destiny, his hand trembling ever so slightly. The entire crowd seemed to collectively hold its breath. The look in Saunders' eyes was no longer smug. It was something else entirely. Fear. Destiny gently took the phone. "Alyssa, thank you. I'm safe for now. We'll talk soon." Then she hung up. For a moment, no one spoke. People simply stared, the tension almost tangible. Finally, the officer broke the silence. "Ma'am, I'll need you to come to the station for a statement," he mumbled, attempting to save face. Destiny let out a tremulous sigh, relieved but also angry. "No, Officer Saunders, I think I'll walk away now. Unless you have a legitimate charge against me, I believe we're done here." He opened his mouth to argue, but the presence of so many witnesses and the memory of that commanding voice on the phone held him in check. As Destiny began to walk away, phones still recording, he knew it was far from over. In fact, this was only the beginning of a chain of events that would rock the entire Levington Police Department, and perhaps even lead to consequences Officer Saunders never imagined. Destiny's heart still pounded as she turned away from Officer Saunders, her legs shaking beneath her cool composure. She was grateful for the small crowd that had gathered. If not for them, she feared how the confrontation might have escalated. A mixture of adrenaline and anger surged through her. Her day had been so ordinary just moments before, and now it felt like her entire world was spinning. After distancing herself a block away, she ducked into a small cafe to steady her nerves and gather her thoughts. The smell of fresh coffee and baked pastries offered some comfort. She found a secluded corner table and sank into a chair. Within minutes, her phone buzzed. Alyssa Wade was calling back. Destiny took a deep, calming breath. "Hi, Alyssa," she answered softly. "Des, are you sure you're okay?" Alyssa asked, her tone a blend of professional concern and genuine friendship. "I can't believe that just happened. You did the right thing by calling me." "I'm fine," Destiny replied, though her hands still trembled. "I'm just trying to process this. I never thought I'd actually need that contact. I kept your number, but I never dreamed I'd need it for something like this." Alyssa sighed. Racial profiling, or even the suspicion of it, is a serious matter. We're not supposed to intervene in local matters often, but I'll be honest, I'm not comfortable letting this slide, especially if this officer has a record of questionable behavior. Do you want to file a formal complaint? Destiny hesitated. She'd grown up in neighborhoods where trust in the police was fragile, and she understood the complexity of these situations. Yet a voice in her head reminded her that letting these things slide only perpetuated the cycle. "I'm thinking about it," she finally said. "It's not just for me. It's for the countless others who don't have the connections I do. They deserve justice too." Alyssa's voice softened with encouragement. "Whatever you decide, know that I stand behind you. If you need any help, legal or otherwise, please let me know." They exchanged a few more words before hanging up. Destiny gazed around the cafe, noticing stares from a few people who recognized her from the street scene. Some even approached her table, expressing solidarity and sharing phone camera videos they had taken. She thanked them, took their contact information, and gave them her non-profit's email in case she needed statements. Meanwhile, Officer James Saunders sat in his cruiser, palms sweating against the steering wheel. He felt the judgmental eyes of passers-by on him. A pit formed in his stomach. He'd been sure he was doing his job, responding to a call about suspicious activity. But a cold truth clung to his thoughts. He knew deep down that the call had been flimsy, that suspicious was often code for someone who doesn't look like they belong, and that he'd let his own biases amplify the situation. He kept replaying the phone conversation in his mind. The White House. A senior advisor. He couldn't shake the echo of her threatening, no-nonsense words. If word got out that he had tried to arrest a woman with connections in the highest corridors of power, he could be finished. And the videos. He'd spotted multiple phones aimed at him. This incident could end up on social media, local news, or worse, become a national headline. Returning to the station felt like walking into a lion's den. The moment he stepped through the doors, the curious glances of his fellow officers cut through him. A wave of dread rolled over him. How quickly had the rumor mill started churning? He hustled to his desk, but he couldn't focus on his paperwork or the small talk around him. He turned to his sergeant, Marta Pineda, a sharp-eyed woman known for her fairness. She had heard some chatter, but waited for him to come forward. "Saunders," she said in a measured tone, "I hear you had an interesting run-in." He tried to sound casual. "Some woman got uppity, claiming she was connected to the White House," he said, hoping to downplay it. Marta's gaze narrowed. "Uppity, huh? And did she actually call them?" An involuntary flush spread across his face. "She did. She said she knew a senior advisor. The call was real. I spoke with her." Marta leaned forward. "Look, you know we need a full incident report, and if this escalates, we might face an internal investigation. I suggest you think carefully about how you phrase everything. Understand?" Officer Saunders swallowed. "Yes, Sergeant," he muttered. But inside he couldn't stop thinking that his problems were just beginning. Destiny Carter might have walked away, but her image and her powerful phone call stayed burned in his mind. He had no idea that soon forces much larger than the Levington Police Department would take an interest in their confrontation. The aftershocks of that single encounter would ripple through the city, unveiling corruption, prejudice, and the true meaning of accountability. Back at her apartment, a modest yet cozy place adorned with family photos, Destiny attempted to settle down. Sunlight streamed through the windows, and the hum of the city outside felt strangely comforting after her ordeal. She placed her phone on the coffee table and plopped onto her couch, exhaling a breath she felt she'd held for the past hour. Her mind buzzed with thoughts. Should she file a formal complaint right away? Should she speak with local activists first? Should she simply let it go and try to move on with her life? The notion of letting it go felt like a betrayal to everyone who lacked the connection she had. Flashes of memories from her childhood came unbidden. The times her father, a community organizer, had been stopped and questioned simply because he didn't look like he belonged in a wealthier neighborhood. The times she'd been followed by store employees, suspicious of a young black girl browsing the aisles. Each incident had left a subtle but lasting scar, teaching her that prejudice lurked beneath ordinary interactions. Just then, her mother, Elaine Carter, called. "Baby, I saw you on someone's live stream. Are you all right?" Her mother's voice sounded frantic. Destiny explained the situation, skipping no details, aware that her mother would see right through any attempt to sugarcoat. Elaine sighed heavily. "I'm glad you're safe, but you need to do something about this. That officer has to learn this behavior isn't okay." "I know," Destiny said softly. "I'm worried about the backlash. You know how these things can get twisted. Don't let that stop you. We raised you to stand up for what's right," Elaine insisted. After the call ended, Destiny felt a renewed resolve. Perhaps it was time to call her father's old friend, Edmund Jackson, a civil rights attorney who had worked with local activists for decades. He'd know the best path forward. She dialed his number, and after a few rings, she heard a warm, familiar voice. "Destiny!" Edmund greeted her with the same enthusiastic tone he'd always had. "Heard you might be calling." "Word travels fast," she remarked, letting out a small laugh. She explained what had happened, step by step, concluding with the surreal moment she called the White House. Edmund listened quietly, then said, We need to schedule a meeting. A thorough complaint can open up an investigation. At the very least, they'll have to look into Officer Saunders. He might have a pattern. You're not the first to mention his name." The words lit a spark in Destiny's heart. A pattern. Are there other incidents? "I can't say much over the phone," Edmund cautioned, "but I suspect you're not alone. Let's meet at my office tomorrow morning. We can lay everything on the table." Destiny agreed. The call ended. She realized her hands were shaking, not from fear this time, but from a sense of righteous indignation that she'd inherited from her father. She would see this through. That night, as she prepared for bed, she caught herself thinking back to her time interning in D.C. She had worked in a legislative office first, then served a brief stint at the White House, assisting on community outreach initiatives. She'd discovered just how powerful it could be to have the ear of those in high office, and how important it was to use that power responsibly. Even though she'd moved back to her hometown, she kept in contact with some of those colleagues because she believed in forging strong relationships. Now, those relationships were proving invaluable. Meanwhile, Officer Saunders sat at his own cramped kitchen table, staring at an untouched plate of takeout. His mind wouldn't let go of the day's events. A creeping sense of shame warred with an even stronger sense of anger. He felt wronged, as if he'd been made a fool of. How dare she call the White House, humiliating him in front of so many people? Yet beneath that indignation lurked a flicker of remorse. He couldn't deny the voice in his head that told him he'd acted on bias, not facts. As he scrolled through his phone, dread tightened around his chest. Multiple social media posts were already circulating about a cop who messed with the wrong woman. Some videos had over 1,000 views, and local news outlets had begun to pick up the story. His superiors would see them soon, if they hadn't already. He tossed his phone aside, his appetite lost. He felt the walls closing in, as though one bad decision might be the start of his downfall. Yet he'd never been one to back down from a fight. He was determined to defend himself by any means necessary. A small voice in his head whispered that perhaps there was no defense for what he'd done. He drowned that voice with stubborn self-righteousness. And so the night passed. Both Destiny and Saunders lying awake, each grappling with the reality that their futures were bound together by that fateful encounter on Maple Avenue. The next morning, a buzz of excitement crackled through Levington. News stations replayed the shaky cell phone footage of the confrontation on Maple Avenue, labeling it, "Local Woman Calls White House on Cop." People watched in disbelief as the unbelievably calm Destiny Carter placed her call and the subsequent shift in Officer Saunders' demeanor. The story spread on social media platforms with hashtags like Maple Avenue Showdown and Call from the White House trending regionally. For Destiny, her morning routine was disrupted by a flood of texts and missed calls. Friends, acquaintances, and even strangers reached out to offer support or ask for details. She stepped onto her balcony to sip her coffee, trying to keep her mind focused on her upcoming meeting with Edmund Jackson. Elsewhere in the city, a special meeting was called at the Levington Police Department. Chief Ray Vaughn, a middle-aged man with graying temples and a reputation for integrity, had seen the videos and was troubled by the implications. He looked over the assembled group, Sergeant Marta Pineda, Officer Saunders, and a few other key staffers. The atmosphere was tense. Chief Vaughn rubbed his temples, frustration evident. "I've already received calls from the mayor's office asking about this. Officer Saunders, I need to hear your side of the story." Saunders cleared his throat. "Sir, I responded to a dispatch about suspicious activity. I arrived on Maple Avenue and encountered Ms. Carter. She refused to cooperate." "Hold on," Marta interrupted. "Did she refuse to provide identification, or did she merely ask why she was being stopped?" Saunders' face reddened slightly. "She questioned me, wanted an explanation. Then she pulled out her phone and called the White House, and the next thing I know, I'm being threatened by some senior advisor on the line." Chief Vaughn raised his eyebrows. "Threatened is a strong word, officer. The advisor was warning you against misconduct. Is that correct? Saunders nodded, a surge of resentment flooding him. He hated how incompetent he sounded. Yes, sir, he managed, keeping his tone as even as possible. Look, Vaughan said, fixing Saunders with a steely gaze. We don't know yet if this constitutes a formal case of racial profiling, but the optics are terrible. We've already had issues with community relations. This will only fan the flames. I expect a thorough, honest report. Understood? Yes, Chief, Saunders replied, doing his best to remain stoic. The rest of the meeting passed in a fog for Saunders. He knew that a formal complaint from Destiny Carter could trigger an internal affairs investigation. He also knew that this was not the first time someone had accused him of biased policing, though none of those previous accusations had reached these heights. After the meeting, Sergeant Marta Pineda quietly approached Saunders. You might want to tread carefully, she advised. If Mrs. Carter files that complaint, your record will be reviewed. Saunders felt a flare of panic. So you're saying they'll dig into everything I've done? That's the process, Marta said simply, not unkindly. Sometimes we have to face the consequences of our actions. If you did nothing wrong, you'll be fine. Saunders didn't reply. He simply squared his shoulders and walked away. But in his mind, a multitude of past incidents swirled, each one a small microaggression, a harsh word, a questionable stop. The thought of them coming to light made him nauseous. Meanwhile, Destiny arrived at Edmund Jackson's office, a modest suite in a downtown building. Shelves lined the walls, overflowing with law books and pictures of Edmund with local civil rights leaders. His desk was a cluttered but organized testament to his decades of advocacy. He greeted Destiny warmly and ushered her to a comfortable chair. You look well, considering the circumstances, he remarked, concern evident in his gaze. Destiny smiled, though tension knotted in her shoulders. I'm determined, not necessarily well. Where do we start? Edmund flipped open a notebook. We can file a complaint with the Levington Police Department's Internal Affairs Division. We can also reach out to the Mayor's office, the City Council, or the local Civilian Oversight Board, any or all of these. But before we do, it's important we have all the details. People have come forward with footage and testimonies, which is great. However, be prepared for them to comb through your background too. Destiny swallowed, recalling the many protests she'd attended in college and the outspoken social media posts she'd written. She wasn't ashamed of any of it, but she knew how easily things could be spun against her. I'm ready, she said. Edmund nodded approvingly. You have something most people don't, a powerful ally. The White House is aware of this situation, whether they want to be or not. That will make the department more cautious in how they handle your case. Destiny's eyes flashed. I don't want special treatment just because I know someone at the White House. I want justice. That includes revealing a pattern of misconduct if it exists. Edmund smiled, leaning back in his chair. Then we proceed without fear or favor. Let's do it. And so, with that decision, the final push began. Word spread quickly that Destiny Carter intended to file a complaint, backed by strong legal counsel. The city braced itself for a showdown that could reshape the relationship between the police force and the community. Meanwhile, Officer Saunders took a deep breath, steeling himself for the storm he could already feel brewing. He was determined to fight, to protect his career. Yet a nagging doubt gnawed at him. Perhaps this was the reckoning he'd been avoiding for years. Perhaps his time was finally running out. Over the following week, tensions ran high at the Levington Police Department. Officers traded hushed whispers in the break room, referencing that Maple Avenue incident. Some sympathized with Saunders. After all, they argued, a suspicious activity call warranted a check. Others felt he had indeed gone too far, and that his patterns of harassing minority residents were well known, but rarely addressed. Sergeant Marta Pineda noticed the growing divide among her colleagues. More and more, younger officers came to her privately, expressing concerns about Saunders and other old guard officers who carried certain biases. This department needs to change. one rookie officer, Kyle Jenkins, confided. People around here are tired of feeling unsafe around the police. Marta nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility pressing on her. She knew change was necessary, but it would require a reckoning, a painful one. And now, with national attention creeping in because of Destiny's White House connections, the city found itself under a microscope. At the same time, the local Civilian Oversight Board took the unusual step of scheduling a public hearing to discuss the incident, as well as the broader issue of policing reforms. The hearing was announced in the local newspaper, the Levington Gazette, and quickly garnered public interest. Anonymous tips began flooding in about Officer Saunders, hinting at additional instances of misconduct. Chief Vaughan, recognizing the gravity of the situation, decided he had to act swiftly. He placed Saunders on administrative leave, pending the outcome of an internal investigation. That announcement sent shockwaves through the department. When Saunders received the news, his reaction was a volatile mix of rage and panic. Administrative leave felt like a punishment even before he'd been formally found guilty of anything. His pension, his career, his reputation, everything was on the line. "You can't just suspend me," he snapped, pacing in front of Chief Vaughan's desk. "You have no proof of real misconduct." "I was responding to a dispatch call." Vaughan held Saunders's gaze calmly. "I understand you're upset, but we have to follow protocol. That video, the statements from witnesses, the fact that the White House is tangentially involved, this situation has escalated beyond our department's discretion. We need a neutral investigation." Saunders clenched his fists. "This is all because she made that call to the White House. If she were some random citizen, this wouldn't be happening." Chief Vaughan shrugged. "Maybe not to this extent, but this is the reality now." Saunders stormed out, slamming the door behind him. Outside the station, reporters were already gathering, hoping to catch a word from the controversial officer. Microphones and cameras were thrust in his face. "Officer Saunders, do you have a comment on the complaint filed by Mrs. Destiny Carter?" one reporter shouted. Saunders stared straight ahead, refusing to engage. He marched to his car and sped away, the tension in his jaw nearly cracking his teeth. A swirl of emotions consumed him. Shame, anger, helplessness. He thought about calling the local police union rep. Maybe they could protect him, or at least guide him through the storm. Meanwhile, Destiny Carter continued her daily life, though it was anything but normal now. She was bombarded with interview requests from local news. Civil rights groups applauded her bravery, and some even asked her to speak at events. Her non-profit employer stood firmly behind her, releasing a statement condemning racial profiling. But Destiny felt torn. She was an introvert by nature, someone who preferred making change through quiet meetings and policy proposals rather than standing in front of a camera. The spectacle of it all made her uncomfortable. However, the community's outpouring of support strengthened her resolve. She realized that her fight wasn't just for her own dignity. It was for all those who'd been wrongly stopped, searched, or humiliated, but never had their voices heard. At her kitchen table one evening, she flipped through social media, reading countless supportive messages. Some posts, though, were hateful, accusing her of playing the race card or using her fancy DC, connections to ruin a good cop. She felt a stab of hurt at those words, but she forced herself to keep reading, to understand the breadth of public sentiment. The entire city, and perhaps more of the country, was watching. "Destiny?" Her mother's voice on the phone line. "I saw the news about the hearing. Will you be speaking?" Destiny looked at the calendar pinned to her wall. The hearing was set for the following week. "I think so, Mom," she said softly. "I'm nervous, but I need to tell my side of the story in a public forum." Elaine sighed, her voice full of motherly love. "Just remember you have a whole community behind you, and you have me. Whatever happens, I'm proud of you." Their conversation bolstered Destiny. She stared at the date on the calendar, imagining how it would feel to stand in a crowded room under glaring lights, sharing her story, not just for personal vindication, but for real, lasting change. Across town, Officer Saunders nursed a whiskey at a dimly lit bar, wishing he could rewind time. He still believed he'd done nothing wrong, but the creeping doubt wouldn't leave him alone. All he knew for sure was that the upcoming hearing loomed like a storm cloud on the horizon, threatening to wash away the life he'd built with a single damning torrent. As the public hearing drew closer, the atmosphere in Levington grew electric. The city hadn't seen such a high-profile case of alleged police misconduct in years, and the involvement of Destiny Carter, with her White House connection, only made the stakes higher. Both sides mobilized. Destiny, guided by Edmund Jackson, spent her spare time organizing documentation and statements. She reviewed the cell phone videos taken by bystanders, cringing at her own anxious expression, but also grateful the footage showed her calm demeanor. She wanted to be absolutely sure no one could twist the facts and make it seem like she had been belligerent. Edmund, an old hand at these matters, insisted on rehearsing her statement. In his office, she practiced answering tough questions he anticipated from the police union's counsel. She was surprised by how incisive and sometimes aggressive his hypothetical interrogations were. "You'll need to keep your composure," Edmund reminded her. "Any sign of anger can be used against you. They'll try to paint you as the aggressor or claim you overreacted." Destiny nodded, determined. "I'm not looking to bury Officer Saunders. I only want accountability and systemic change." Edmund gave a small smile. "And that's exactly what you should say." Meanwhile, Officer Saunders found himself trapped in a flurry of anxious meetings with the police union attorney, a brisk woman named Margaret Liu. She examined every detail of Saunders's service record, highlighting any potential vulnerabilities. "There have been 3 complaints in the last 5 years about your conduct during traffic stops," she informed him, flipping through a file. He shifted in his seat. "Those were minor," he muttered. "Minor or not, they'll come up," Liu said flatly, adjusting her glasses. "If the Civilian Oversight Board sees a pattern, your defense weakens." Saunders felt sweat gathering on his brow. "What do I do?" "We build a narrative that you were following proper procedure," Liu replied. "Dispatch called you about suspicious activity," you responded, "and Miss Carter refused to identify herself promptly. If we can maintain that you acted within protocol, we have a shot." "And if they bring up racism?" Saunders asked, trying to keep his voice steady. Liu gave him a measured look. "We deny it. No one can know your intentions but you. If there's no direct evidence of racist remarks or policy violations, it's a matter of interpretation." Saunders exhaled, trying to quell his pounding heart. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was in deeper water than he'd ever been, but retreat wasn't an option. In the days leading up to the hearing, the local press held panel discussions. The Levington Gazette ran an editorial calling for transparency and reforms. Community activists organized a peaceful march to the courthouse in support of Destiny. Flyers advertising the march read, "Stand with Destiny Carter, stand for justice." The city's diverse populace seemed to rally around the cause, many seeing it as a chance to finally confront a policing culture they believed had grown stagnant and abusive. Destiny, while appreciative of the support, found the public attention overwhelming. She was recognized on the street, approached with encouragement, sometimes even asked for autographs. A local pastor invited her to speak at a Sunday service about civil rights, and a group of college students asked if she'd attend their campus forum on race relations. She tried to fulfill requests selectively, not wanting to be overextended before the hearing. Yet each time she spoke, she felt the incredible energy of people longing for change. At night, she often found herself pacing her bedroom, trying to sort through her emotions. Standing up against an entire police department was daunting, even with a legal team at her side. She prayed she'd have the strength and that the truth would prevail. On the other side of town, Officer Saunders sat in his apartment, no longer able to go out for a simple drink without receiving dirty looks or hearing whispered remarks. He avoided eye contact with neighbors and even started wearing a baseball cap to shield his face in public. He rarely slept, nightmares of lost badges and shouting crowds jolting him awake. Each day he regretted not just that fateful confrontation, but the many small, dismissive or aggressive moments that had built his reputation among certain communities. Had it all been worth it? One thing was certain: as the hearing approached, neither Destiny nor Saunders could predict what new revelations might come to light. The city held its collective breath, waiting to see whether justice, redemption, or scandal would emerge from the halls of power, and the secrets long concealed behind badges. The Grand Hall of Levington's City Centre Auditorium was a stark, formal room used for public hearings and council meetings. Rows of chairs filled the open space, and a broad wooden table and podium stood at the front for testimonies. On the day of the hearing, the seats were nearly all occupied, with people even standing along the walls. Cameras from local and regional news outlets formed a small forest of tripods at the back. At exactly 9 a.m., the chairperson of the Civilian Oversight Board, a wiry man named Eugene Caldwell, banged his gavel. This hearing is now in session to examine the conduct of Officer James Saunders in the incident involving Ms. Destiny Carter on Maple Avenue. The board also acknowledges the broader concerns raised by citizens about the policing culture in Levington. We ask for order and respect throughout these proceedings. Destiny sat in the front row with Edmund beside her. She wore a simple yet professional blouse and skirt, her hands clasped to hide their trembling. Edmund placed a reassuring hand on her arm. "Just tell the truth," he whispered. Officer Saunders sat at a separate table with Margaret Liu. His face was pale, dark circles underscored his eyes. Every moment felt surreal. Was he really on the verge of losing his career? One by one, the board called forth witnesses. First came the dispatch officer who'd taken the call about suspicious activity. She testified that the caller had described a young black woman loitering, though no specific crime was reported. Next, bystanders who had captured footage of the incident came forward, each recounting the brief confrontation. Their accounts were consistent. Destiny had been calm, asking why she was being stopped, and Saunders had seemed aggressive or dismissive. Then came Destiny's turn. She stood, smoothing her skirt before stepping up to the microphone. The crowd quieted, and camera lenses pointed at her. She took a moment to gather herself, remembering all the community members counting on her. "My name is Destiny Carter," she began, voice quavering for an instant before finding its strength. "On the day in question, I was shopping on Maple Avenue, looking for a gift for my niece. Officer Saunders approached me, demanded identification without explaining the nature of the suspicion, and grew confrontational when I asked for clarity." She paused, meeting Saunders's gaze for a fraction of a second. He looked away. "I've lived in Levington most of my life," Destiny continued. "I've worked in government. I believe in the rule of law, and I respect officers who serve our communities. But far too often, people who look like me are approached with undue suspicion. I was fortunate enough to have connections that forced Officer Saunders to back down. But many do not have that privilege. This hearing isn't just about me, it's about the systemic problems that allow such profiling to persist." A wave of soft applause rippled through the audience, which Eugene Caldwell quickly hushed with a tap of his gavel. Destiny's eyes glistened with restrained emotion as she walked back to her seat. Edmund gave her a discreet nod of approval. Next, the board called upon Officer Saunders. He stood stiffly and approached the microphone. Cameras clicked, capturing the tension that radiated from him. Clearing his throat, he began, "I responded to a dispatch call stating there was suspicious activity on Maple Avenue. I followed standard procedure, asking Ms. Carter for identification. She refused initially and then escalated the situation by making a phone call." Someone in the audience huffed. Another person muttered, "Yeah, to the White House." A small ripple of laughter and commentary traveled through the crowd. The gavel banged again for silence. Officer Saunders turned defensive. I was doing my job. If a citizen refuses to comply, I have the right to detain them. I never threatened Mrs. Carter, and I didn't use force. Regarding the allegation of racial bias, I categorically deny it. The call was about a suspicious person. If Ms. Carter had cooperated, this wouldn't have escalated. Margaret Liu, the union attorney, then questioned Saunders, guiding him through points meant to show that he was operating within department guidelines. However, under cross-examination by Edmund Jackson, cracks in Saunders' story began to appear. Edmund asked sharply, "Officer Saunders, did you ever once explain to Ms. Carter what the nature of the suspicious activity was?" Saunders hesitated. I told her that dispatch reported suspicious behavior, which was reason enough to check." "So you had no specific details, only that she looked suspicious?" Edmund pressed, raising an eyebrow. Saunders shifted uncomfortably. "Yes." Edmund allowed a beat of silence. "Do you see why many in our community might feel that this so-called suspicion was merely an excuse for harassment?" Saunders bit his lip, anxiety simmering. "I was doing my job," he repeated. Finally, after hours of statements and evidence review, Eugene Caldwell concluded the hearing with grave formality. "The board will deliberate on the evidence presented, as well as the complaints filed against Officer Saunders and the Levington Police Department. Our findings and recommendations will be released in the coming weeks. This session is adjourned." A rush of murmurs and conversations filled the hall. Destiny felt like she could finally breathe again. She locked eyes with Edmund, who looked confident enough, but they both knew the real work was still ahead. Public opinion had swayed heavily in her favor, but the board's decision was not guaranteed. Officer Saunders, on the other hand, felt like he'd just emerged from a war zone. He could still sense the cameras on him, capturing every telling flicker of guilt or fear on his face. As he exited the auditorium, a small group of protesters holding Justice for Destiny signs booed him. He pushed past them, head down, desperate to find a moment of quiet. Little did either of them realize that this hearing was about more than one case. It was a spark that might ignite profound change or descend into chaos, depending on what came next. In the days following the hearing, public discourse around the Levington Police Department reached a fever pitch. Social media blazed with debate. One side argued that Officer Saunders was the product of a broken system that normalized bias, while others insisted Destiny had blown the incident out of proportion, leveraging her White House connection for personal gain. Yet behind the scenes, more unexpected developments were brewing. Anonymous letters began arriving at the Civilian Oversight Board's office, each one containing allegations about Officer Saunders and a small circle of other officers. These letters claimed there was a secret code of silence within the department protecting those who racially profiled citizens. Some letters included partial copies of official reports, each suspiciously lacking basic details about arrests or detentions. When the board received these documents, Eugene Caldwell called for a private meeting with Chief Vaughn. Tension hung in the air as Caldwell laid out the letters, pointing to the patterns. "This isn't just about Destiny Carter anymore," Caldwell said quietly. "Someone inside the department is providing evidence of systematic problems." Chief Vaughn felt his stomach drop. "If this is legitimate, we have a bigger crisis on our hands. I'll have Internal Affairs cross-check the reports." As the news of these leaked documents spread among city officials, speculation soared. Who was sending them? A whistleblower? A disgruntled ex-officer? Some believed that Sergeant Marta Pineda might be the source, as she was known to be critical of certain department practices. Others suspected a group of younger officers who wanted to modernize the department and root out bias. Meanwhile, Destiny tried to maintain focus on her daily job at the non-profit. She had a grant application due, an important project that would secure funding for a local after-school program. But her email and phone rang non-stop with requests for interviews or offers for speaking engagements. She found it increasingly hard to concentrate. One afternoon, a call from Alyssa Wade, her mentor at the White House, offered a bit of much-needed encouragement. Des, Alyssa said warmly, I'm so proud of you for standing up and going through that hearing. I've heard talk about potential federal involvement if the allegations of widespread misconduct are proven. Are you prepared for that? Destiny nearly spilled her coffee at the thought. Federal involvement? Like a Department of Justice investigation? Possibly, Alyssa confirmed. The White House might issue a statement if the situation escalates, but it all depends on how the city handles it. Destiny's pulse raced. She knew the stakes were high, but hearing it from Alyssa made it feel real. Thanks for the heads up, she murmured. I appreciate everything you've done for me. Back at the police station, an uneasy calm settled over the force. Officer Saunders remained on administrative leave, barricading himself in his apartment. Now that more evidence was trickling out, he worried that every negative aspect of his career might be dredged up. He also received an unexpected phone call from a local reporter, Paula Green, of the Levington Gazette, who had stumbled upon new information. Officer Saunders, Paula said politely, I'd like to give you a chance to comment on the recent leaks suggesting a pattern of harassment within the department. Saunders' voice wavered. I have no comment on that, he said, feeling cornered. Paula paused. Are you aware that multiple letters reference a group of officers, including you, who allegedly targeted minority citizens in stops and searches? A surge of dread rolled over Saunders. He ended the call abruptly, anxiety clawing at him. His mind replayed moment after moment where he might have crossed the line or participated in a cover-up. The weight of guilt threatened to suffocate him. As days turned into weeks, the city of Levington waited anxiously for the Civilian Oversight Board's formal findings. Rumors of a Department of Justice intervention made the rounds. The tension was palpable in community centers, church gatherings, and dinner tables across town. Everyone seemed to sense that Levington stood at a crossroads. Either it would face its policing issues head-on, or the entire facade of law and order would crumble beneath the weight of hidden corruption. For Destiny, each new day brought a mix of hope and weariness. She saw how her stand was inspiring others to come forward, individuals who had been harassed or mistreated in silence. But she also felt the toll it took on her emotional well-being. Her days of quiet, dedicated non-profit work seemed like a distant memory. No one could predict the final outcome. But one thing was certain, the aftermath of that single arrest attempt on Maple Avenue had grown into a wave that refused to be ignored, a wave that might sweep the entire city into a new era, or drown it in scandal and regret. Several weeks after the public hearing, the Civilian Oversight Board reconvened for a special session. Word spread quickly. This was the day they would announce their findings and recommendations. The atmosphere in the city center auditorium was thick with anticipation. Camera crews once again lined the back of the room, capturing every second for the evening news. Destiny Carter arrived hand in hand with her mother, Elaine. Edmund Jackson walked just behind them, carrying a briefcase brimming with documents. The hush that fell over the crowd as they entered spoke to the significance of the moment. Across the aisle, Officer Saunders sat with Margaret Liu. He looked pale and gaunt, his eyes hollow from sleepless nights. Eugene Caldwell rapped his gavel. We are here to deliver the board's findings in the matter of Officer James Saunders and the broader concerns regarding policing practices in Levington. He paused, scanning the silent assembly. After reviewing testimony, video evidence, dispatch records, and additional documentation, including anonymous submissions, we have reached the following conclusions. A hush settled, so profound that one could hear the shuffle of papers in Caldwell's hand. First, in the specific incident involving Ms. Destiny Carter, the board finds that Officer Saunders acted without sufficient cause. Although suspicious activity calls warrant investigation, his subsequent actions were disproportionate and indicative of bias. We therefore recommend disciplinary action, which may include suspension without pay or termination. A collective gasp rippled through the room. Saunders sagged visibly, like a puppet whose strings were cut. Margaret Liu's lips pressed into a thin line, but she refrained from speaking. Caldwell continued, Second, The documentation provided suggests a pattern of racially biased stops and detentions by certain officers within the Levington Police Department. We are forwarding this evidence to the Department of Justice for further investigation. Our recommendation is a top-down review of the department's policies, mandatory bias training, and the creation of a permanent, fully empowered civilian oversight committee. The audience erupted in applause and chatter, though Caldwell again used his gavel to maintain order. Destiny closed her eyes, feeling a wave of relief wash over her. This was what she and many others had hoped for, real accountability and a chance for systemic change. Officer Saunders stood abruptly, ignoring Liu's attempts to calm him. "This is ridiculous," he shouted. Cameras swiveled to capture his outburst. "I served this city for years, and now you want to paint me as some kind of racist criminal? I was doing my job." Caldwell's face remained impassive. "Officer Saunders, please sit down and remain respectful. Our findings are based on a comprehensive investigation." Saunders ignored him, turning instead to Destiny. "I hope you're happy," he spat, a tremor in his voice. "You ruined my life, all for a little media attention." Destiny's mother stepped protectively in front of her, but Destiny gently placed a hand on Elaine's shoulder. "I didn't ruin your life," Destiny said softly yet firmly. "Your actions did. I just stood up for myself." Saunders opened his mouth, perhaps to hurl another accusation, but Margaret Liu tugged on his arm, pulling him away before he could say something even more incriminating. Amid the barrage of flashing cameras, he stormed out of the auditorium, leaving chaos in his wake. In the days that followed, karma seemed to strike hard and fast. Officer Saunders's administrative leave became a suspension, and the department began formal termination proceedings. Internal Affairs unearthed more evidence that he and a few others had repeatedly targeted minority communities. Civil lawsuits loomed on the horizon. Destiny, by contrast, found herself lauded by many community members. People recognized her in grocery stores, thanking her for her courage. The non-profit she worked for benefited from a surge in donations, which promised new expansions for the programs she cared so deeply about. Yet the most significant victory was the city's decision to undergo sweeping reforms. Under pressure from the Department of Justice, Levington's mayor announced a plan to restructure the police department. Chief Vaughan, to his credit, agreed to collaborate fully. Officers would undergo intensive training, community review boards would be given real power, and the department's data on stops and searches would be made public. When Alyssa Wade from the White House called Destiny to congratulate her, Destiny felt a swirl of emotions, pride, relief, and a lingering sadness for the damage done. "Alyssa," she said, "this is just a start. Real change will take time, and I hope the city stays committed." In the ensuing weeks, Officer Saunders vanished from public view. Rumor had it he retreated to a relative's home in another state, hoping to avoid the fallout. Few had sympathy for him, given the mounting evidence of his misconduct. He had reaped exactly what he had sown, and the city moved forward without him. Meanwhile, Destiny quietly continued her daily life, attending staff meetings, finalizing grant applications, and volunteering at local events. She didn't see herself as a hero. She saw herself as a catalyst for a change that was long overdue, a change that would hopefully save someone else from living through what she experienced. And in that sense, she realized, maybe there was something heroic in simply doing what was right. Thank you for joining me on this journey through a story of power, prejudice, and ultimately redemption. Destiny Carter's brave decision to stand up for herself, supported by a community that refused to stay silent, sparked a wave of accountability and reform. The cop who attempted to arrest her underestimated not only her personal connections, but the strength of ordinary people coming together to do what's right. In the end, the walls of injustice and bias came tumbling down, proving that one voice can echo across an entire city. If you found this story meaningful, be sure to like, share, and subscribe to this channel. Your support helps keep these important conversations alive and reminds us all that change is possible, no matter how insurmountable the odds may seem. Together, let's continue to spread messages of hope, justice and understanding to every corner of the world.